The morning sun cast long shadows across the private airfield as Sarah Mitchell strode confidently toward the sleek white private jet bearing her company's logo. At 35, she had become one of the youngest CEOs in the tech industry, building her startup into a billion-dollar enterprise in just 8 years. Today was particularly important. She was heading to Tokyo for a merger that would double her company's value. Sarah checked her watch, a gift from her late grandmother who had always believed in her dreams, even when others doubted. It was 7:30 a.m., and she was right on schedule. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she pulled her designer rolling briefcase, which contained the crucial merger documents. She had chosen her outfit carefully that morning: a tailored navy blue suit, pearl earrings, and her signature red bottom heels. Her natural hair was styled in elegant braids, a style she had proudly worn throughout her career despite occasional pressure to change it. As she approached the private jet's entrance, a new security guard stepped out from his booth. Thomas Wells had only been working at the airport for 3 weeks, and he took great pride in his position of authority. He was the kind of man who made quick judgments based on appearances, and today would prove to be a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. "Excuse me, miss," Thomas called out, his hand raised in a stopping motion. "The employee parking lot is around back." He spoke slowly and loudly, as if speaking to someone who might not understand English well. "And the cleaning crew isn't scheduled until this evening." Sarah's steps slowed, but the small smile never left her face. She'd encountered situations like this throughout her career, at board meetings where she was mistaken for the secretary, at restaurants where they'd hand the bill to her male colleagues, and at conferences where people assumed she was part of the catering staff. Several employees from her company were arriving now, parking their expensive cars in the designated area. Mark from finance, Stephen from legal, and James from operations. All white men in suits similar to hers walked past. Thomas nodded respectfully at each of them, stepping aside to let them pass without asking for any identification. "Good morning, gentlemen," Thomas said, tipping his head. "Right this way." Sarah remained standing there, her smile growing slightly wider. She could have immediately pulled out her ID or called security to have Thomas reprimanded. She could have made a scene or demanded to speak to his supervisor. Instead, she chose to wait patiently, knowing what was about to unfold. Her CFO, Michael Richardson, was just arriving. He was running slightly late, as usual, clutching his coffee cup and hurrying across the tarmac. When he spotted Sarah, his face lit up with relief. "Madam CEO," he called out, slightly out of breath. "So sorry I'm cutting it close. I got those final projection numbers you wanted to review during the flight." Thomas's head snapped around so fast it was almost comical. His face, which had been set in stern authority just moments before, now drained of all color. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and professional. "Good morning, Thomas," she said, reading his name tag. "I believe you were about to direct me to the employee parking lot." Her tone wasn't angry or mocking. If anything, it carried a hint of gentle amusement. The security guard's face had now turned from pale to bright red. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't realize. I shouldn't have assumed." "You're right," Sarah agreed, still maintaining her composure. "We shouldn't make assumptions about people based on their appearance." She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her ID badge, though she no longer needed to show it. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, CEO of TechVision Global, and while I appreciate your dedication to security, perhaps this can be a reminder that excellence and leadership come in all forms." Thomas stood frozen, mortification evident on his face as other employees continued to arrive, all greeting Sarah with obvious respect and deference. His complete misjudgment of the situation was now painfully clear to everyone present. The morning sun continued to rise over the airfield, promising the beginning of what would prove to be a very enlightening day, not just for Thomas Wells, but for everyone who would later hear this story. Continued in Part 2, the growing crowd of employees gathered near the private jet created an audience for what was becoming an increasingly uncomfortable situation. Thomas Wells, the security guard, stood rooted to his spot, his collar feeling tighter with each passing second. The morning air felt thick with tension, but Sarah Mitchell maintained her characteristic grace. Michael Richardson, the CFO, looked between Sarah and Thomas, quickly understanding what had transpired. He had witnessed similar scenarios before, having worked with Sarah for the past 5 years. He knew his boss well enough to predict that this wouldn't end in anger or harsh punishment. Sarah had a different way of handling such situations. Perhaps, Thomas, Sarah began, setting her briefcase upright beside her. You'd like to walk with me to the jet? We seem to have a few minutes before takeoff, and I believe this could be a valuable conversation for both of us. Thomas glanced nervously at his security booth, then back at Sarah. His shift supervisor would be arriving soon, and he was terrified this incident would cost him his job. With 3 kids at home and a mortgage to pay, he couldn't afford to lose this position. To his surprise, Sarah's expression showed no malice. "Ah, yes, ma'am," he managed to stammer out, falling into step beside her as she began walking toward the aircraft. As they walked, Sarah spoke in a measured, thoughtful tone. "You know, Thomas, 10 years ago, I was told I didn't look like someone who could run a tech company. 5 years ago, I was asked to serve coffee in my own boardroom." She chuckled softly at the memory. "And just last month, at a global tech conference, someone assumed I was part of the entertainment team." Thomas listened intently, his shame growing with each word, but there was something in Sarah's voice that kept him engaged rather than defensive. "But here's what's interesting," she continued, posing near the jet's stairs. "Each of those moments became opportunities, not just for me to prove someone wrong, but for someone else to learn and grow." She turned to face him directly. "Would you like to know how I built this company?" Thomas nodded, finding his voice. "Yes, ma'am, I would." Sarah gestured to her team boarding the jet. "I built it by understanding that talent, intelligence, and leadership don't have a specific look. My company succeeds because we judge people by their capabilities, not their appearance." She smiled warmly at a young flight attendant who was waiting respectfully nearby. "I started in my garage with 2 computers and a dream," Sarah continued. "People said a black woman couldn't succeed in tech. They said I was too young, too ambitious, too different. But those assumptions, they became my fuel." By now, several other airport staff had gathered nearby, pretending to be busy with their tasks but clearly listening to every word. Thomas found himself hanging on each sentence, seeing his own prejudices laid bare in the most graceful way possible. "So, Thomas," Sarah said, reaching into her briefcase, "I'm not going to report this incident. Instead, I'm going to do something else." She pulled out a business card and handed it to him. "Next month, my company is hosting a seminar on unconscious bias and inclusive leadership. I'd like you to attend as my guest." Thomas stared at the card in his trembling hands. I don't know what to say, Ms. Mitchell. Most people would have demanded my firing." "Firing you wouldn't solve anything," Sarah replied, checking her watch. "But learning from this moment, that could change everything." She gestured to the card. "The seminar includes airport and airline staff. I think your perspective could be valuable." A voice called from the jet's doorway. It was time for departure. Sarah picked up her briefcase, then turned back to Thomas one last time. "Remember, Thomas, the most powerful changes often come from our most uncomfortable moments. Don't let shame hold you back. Let it push you forward." As Sarah climbed the stairs to her jet, Thomas stood watching, the business card clutched tightly in his hand. Around him, the morning activities at the airport continued, but he knew that nothing would ever be quite the same. In just 15 minutes, his entire worldview had been challenged and changed by a woman he had wrongly judged. The jet's engines began to roar to life, and Thomas stepped back, his mind already made up about attending that seminar. Sometimes, he realized, the biggest mistakes could lead to the most important lessons. Continued in Part 3. As Sarah settled into her leather seat aboard the private jet, her team couldn't help but notice the thoughtful expression on her face. The encounter with Thomas had stirred memories of her own journey, memories she rarely shared with others. While her employees prepared for takeoff, Sarah's mind drifted back to the moments that had shaped her path to success. Michael Richardson, her trusted CFO, sat across from her and broke the silence. "That was quite a teaching moment back there, Sarah. Reminded me of how we first met." He smiled, remembering his own embarrassing assumptions when Sarah had interviewed him 5 years ago. Sarah returned his smile, removing her laptop from her briefcase. "Sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected places," she replied, then turned to address her entire team in the cabin. "In fact, since we have a few hours before Tokyo, I'd like to share something with all of you." The team members, consisting of 6 executives, leaned in closer. It was rare for their CEO to speak about personal matters, and they could sense the importance of the moment. The jet's engines hummed steadily as they reached cruising altitude, creating a perfect backdrop for storytelling. 10 years ago, Sarah began, her voice clear and steady. I was working as a junior programmer at a major tech company. I had developed a revolutionary security algorithm, but nobody would listen to my presentations. They assumed I was just another diversity hire. She paused, adjusting her blazer. One day, I decided to submit my work under a different name, James Williams. Her team listened intently as the story unfolded. The flight attendant quietly served coffee, careful not to interrupt the moment. Suddenly, everyone was interested in James's work. They called it brilliant, innovative, groundbreaking. Sarah's eyes sparkled with a mixture of amusement and determination. When I finally revealed that I was the actual creator, the company's leadership was shocked. Instead of apologizing, they tried to bury my achievement. Jessica Chen, the head of marketing, gasped softly. As the only other woman on the executive team, she understood all too well the challenges Sarah described. But here's where the story gets interesting, Sarah continued, accepting a cup of coffee. Instead of fighting a system that wouldn't recognize my worth, I decided to build my own system. I took my algorithm, remortgaged my house, and started TechVision Global from my garage. The team members exchanged glances, many hearing this origin story for the first time. They knew Sarah was successful, but few understood the depths she had overcome. The same companies that rejected me now pay millions to use my security systems, she said with a slight smile. But more importantly, I built a company where talent matters more than appearance, where innovation isn't judged by the innovator's skin color or gender. Sarah stood up, walking to the jet's window. The clouds below looked like a soft carpet stretching to the horizon. That security guard today, he reminded me why we're flying to Tokyo. This merger isn't just about business growth, it's about expanding our influence to create more opportunities for people who might otherwise be overlooked. Michael nodded in agreement, understanding now why Sarah had handled the situation with such patience. You turned his mistake into an opportunity for change, he observed. Exactly, Sarah replied, turning back to her team. And that's what I expect from all of you. When we land in Tokyo, we're not just representing a company, we're representing a vision of what business can be when we look past our prejudices. The cabin fell silent as her words sank in. Even the most seasoned executives found themselves reflecting on their own biases and assumptions. Now, Sarah said, returning to her seat and opening her laptop, let's review those merger documents. We have a company to grow and minds to change. As the team began their meeting, Sarah glanced out the window once more. Somewhere below, she knew Thomas was probably still thinking about their encounter. She hoped he would attend the seminar, but more than that, she hoped he would share his experience with others. The jet continued its journey across the Pacific, carrying not just a group of executives, but a message about change, growth, and the power of turning prejudice into progress. Sarah smiled to herself, knowing that sometimes the best way to fight discrimination wasn't with anger, but with wisdom and opportunity. Continued in Part 4. The private jet was 5 hours into its journey to Tokyo when Sarah received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "An apology and a thank you," from Thomas Wells. Her team was taking a short break from their merger preparations, and Sarah found herself with a quiet moment to read the guard's message. Opening her laptop wider, she began to read. Dear Ms. Mitchell, I haven't been able to stop thinking about what happened this morning. After you left, I called my teenage daughter during my break. She's always telling me I need to check my privilege and examine my biases. I never really understood what she meant until today. Sarah's attention was briefly interrupted as Jessica Chen, her marketing director, offered her a fresh cup of coffee. Everything okay? Jessica asked, noticing Sarah's intense focus on the screen. More than okay, Sarah replied, gesturing for Jessica to take the seat beside her. Remember our friend from the airport? He's already starting his journey of change. She turned the screen slightly so Jessica could read along. The email continued. My daughter was so disappointed when I told her what I'd done. But then I told her how you handled it, with grace and wisdom instead of anger. She said that's exactly what she's learning about in her social justice club at school. I've already registered for your company's seminar next month, and I asked if my daughter could attend too. I want to learn to see the world through better eyes." Jessica smiled, understanding the significance of this quick response. "It's amazing how one interaction can create such immediate change," she observed. Sarah nodded, then continued reading the email aloud soft enough for only Jessica to hear. "After you left, my supervisor saw I was upset and asked what happened. I told him everything. Instead of firing me, he's now requiring all security staff to attend sensitivity training. Your 15 minutes at our airport is already creating ripples of change." The two women exchanged knowing looks. This was exactly the kind of impact Sarah had always hoped to achieve, not just in business, but in changing hearts and minds. Just then, Michael approached with some merger documents requiring Sarah's attention. She quickly finished reading the email's final paragraph. "Thank you for seeing me not as a lost cause, but as someone who could learn and grow. My daughter says you're now her role model, and honestly, you become mine too. Respectfully, Thomas Wells." Sarah closed her laptop, her mind already forming plans. She turned to Jessica. "I want you to help me with something when we return. I think we need to expand our inclusion seminar program." Jessica pulled out her tablet, ready to take notes. "What are you thinking?" "That guard's email just showed me something important," Sarah explained, as Michael sat down across from them, interested in the conversation. "We've been focusing our diversity initiatives internally, but there's a whole world of Thomas Wellses out there, people who just need the right moment and the right guidance to change." Michael leaned forward, his financial mind already working. "You want to take our internal training program public?" Sarah's eyes lit up with that familiar spark her team knew well, the one that usually preceded a brilliant idea. "Not just public. I want to make it free for essential workers, security guards, receptionists, service staff. The people who are often the first point of contact, the ones making split-second judgments about who belongs where." Jessica was already typing rapidly on her tablet. "We could create a modified version of our corporate program. Maybe even get Thomas and his daughter to speak at the first session." "Exactly," Sarah replied, her voice growing excited. "Sometimes the most powerful messages come from people who've lived the change themselves." The three executives spent the next hour outlining this new initiative, temporarily setting aside the merger documents. Outside the jet's windows, the sun was setting in a spectacular display of orange and purple, a reminder of how far they traveled, both literally and figuratively, since that morning's incident. As Sarah finally returned to reviewing the merger paperwork, she couldn't help but smile. What had started as an unpleasant encounter was transforming into something far more significant. She had always believed that real change happened one person at a time, and now she was watching it unfold in real time. The jet continued its journey across the Pacific, carrying not just a team heading to a business merger, but also the seeds of a new initiative that would grow from one security guard's mistake into a movement for change. The Tokyo skyline emerged through the jet's windows as they began their descent. Sarah had just finished a video call with her office back home, where she learned something unexpected. The video of her interaction with Thomas, captured by the airport's security cameras, had somehow been leaked online and was quickly going viral. "Sarah," Jessica said urgently, holding up her tablet, "you need to see this. The video has over 2 million views already. #CO Teach Lesson is trending on Twitter." Sarah leaned over to watch the silent security footage. The camera had captured the entire scene from multiple angles. Her confident walk, Thomas stopping her, her patient waiting, and their subsequent conversation. What struck her most was how clearly the body language told the story, even without sound. "The comments are overwhelmingly positive," Michael added, scrolling through his phone. "People are sharing their own similar experiences, but more importantly, others are admitting to their own biases and promising to do better." Sarah sat back in her seat, processing this unexpected development. She had always been private about such encounters, preferring to handle them quietly and personally. But now, this private moment had become public, and she needed to decide how to respond. The jet touched down smoothly at Narita International Airport. As the team prepared to disembark, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her PR director back in the States. "Major news networks requesting interviews. Ellen Show called. Your approach to handling discrimination has struck a chord. How do you want to proceed?" Standing up to gather her belongings, Sarah addressed her team. Well, it seems our Tokyo merger isn't the only significant event we need to manage. She straightened her blazer and smiled. Sometimes the universe has bigger plans than we do. As they walked through Narita Airport, Sarah noticed several people doing double takes, looking between their phones and her. The video had reached Japan too. A young Japanese airport worker, a woman in her early 20s, approached them with a deep bow. Mitchell-san, she said in careful English, your video, very important. Same thing happened here too. Different look, different culture, same problem. She bowed again. Thank you for teaching with kindness. Sarah thanked her warmly, and as they continued toward customs, she made a decision. Turning to Jessica, she said, call PR. Tell them I'll do the interviews, but with conditions. This isn't about me. It's about the bigger conversation we need to have. The team reached their waiting cars as local news crews began gathering outside the airport. Word had spread that the viral CEO had landed in Tokyo. Sarah watched them through the tinted windows, her mind already formulating a plan. Change the merger announcement, she told Michael, who looked surprised. Add a new element. TechVision Global will be establishing a global inclusion initiative, starting with joint programs here in Japan. If this video has taught us anything, it's that these issues are universal. Michael quickly ran some numbers on his tablet. We can redirect some of the merger's PR budget. The timing is perfect. It shows we're not just expanding our business, but our values too. As their convoy of cars moved through Tokyo's busy streets, Sarah received another email from Thomas. He wrote that his story had been picked up by local news, and he'd been receiving messages from other security personnel worldwide. Many shared similar stories of their own biased assumptions and wanted to know how to do better. Look at this, Sarah showed Jessica the email. Thomas is becoming an advocate for change himself. Sometimes the student becomes the teacher. Jessica nodded thoughtfully. It's like ripples in a pond. One moment of grace creating waves of change. Their cars pulled up to the prestigious Tokyo hotel where they would be staying. Through the lobby windows, Sarah could see more reporters gathering. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt energized. What had started as a simple incident at a small airport was evolving into something much larger. A global conversation about prejudice, dignity, and the power of responding to bias with wisdom rather than anger. As her team prepared for the busy days ahead, Sarah took a moment to send a quick reply to Thomas. Keep sharing your story. Sometimes our mistakes can become our greatest opportunities to teach others. See you at the seminar. 2 days into their Tokyo visit, Sarah found herself sitting in a sleek conference room on the 40th floor of a glass skyscraper. The merger negotiations were proceeding smoothly, but the viral video of her interaction with Thomas had unexpectedly opened new doors. The Japanese executives, who had initially been somewhat reserved, were now deeply interested in more than just TechVision's technology. Mitchell-san, said Mr. Tanaka, the CEO of the Japanese firm, during a break in negotiations. We have watched your airport video many times. Our country also struggles with similar problems: discrimination against foreigners, women in business, different cultures. Perhaps our merger can address more than just business. Sarah set down her green tea and leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing, Tanaka-san? The elderly Japanese businessman smiled warmly. In Japan, we have saying, Ichigo Ichi, one time, one meeting. Every encounter is unique and special. Your encounter with security guard-san, you made it special. You made it teaching moment. We want to learn this approach. As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed with another update from her PR team. The video had now reached 50 million views globally, spawning thousands of similar stories. People worldwide were sharing their experiences of facing discrimination and, more importantly, how they chose to handle it. You know, Sarah began, addressing the room of Japanese executives. When I started this trip, I thought we were just merging two tech companies. But maybe we're being given an opportunity to merge two important conversations, one about technology and one about human dignity. Mr. Tanaka nodded enthusiastically, speaking rapidly in Japanese to his team. His translator explained that he wanted to incorporate Sarah's inclusion training program into their merged company's global initiative, starting with all their Asian offices. During lunch, Sarah received another surprising email. It was from the International Airport Security Association. They wanted her and Thomas to be keynote speakers at their annual conference, focusing on the importance of addressing unconscious bias in security protocols. Things are moving fast, Michael observed, reviewing the growing list of speaking requests and partnership proposals on his tablet. We're going to need a dedicated team just to handle all these inclusion initiatives. Sarah smiled, remembering Thomas's nervous face from just a few days ago. You know what's remarkable? None of this would have happened if Thomas had simply waved me through to the plane. Sometimes our biggest opportunities come disguised as our biggest challenges. That evening, during a traditional Japanese dinner with their new business partners, Mr. Tanaka's daughter, Yuki, who was the company's head of innovation, shared her own story. Last year, Yuki said in perfect English, I went to Silicon Valley for meetings. Security guard thought I was cleaning staff. I got angry, made complaint. But your way, Mitchell-san, your way creates change, not just conflict. The dinner conversation evolved into a deep discussion about how different cultures handle discrimination and bias. Stories were shared around the table, experiences from Japan, America, and beyond. Sarah listened intently, taking mental notes for her expanding global initiative. Later that night, in her hotel room overlooking the glittering Tokyo skyline, Sarah opened her laptop to find an update from Thomas. He had given his first interview to a local newspaper, speaking honestly about his biases and what he had learned. The article was thoughtful and humble, focusing on personal growth rather than shame. Sarah began typing a response to Thomas when she received a video call from her mother back home. Baby girl, her mother said, tears in her eyes, I just saw you on the national news. You handled that situation exactly like your grandmother would have. She always said, when they go low, you go high and take others with you. Looking out at the Tokyo night sky, Sarah felt a deep sense of purpose. What had started as a simple incident at a small airport was transforming into a global movement for change. She turned back to her mother's image on the screen. You know, Mom, I think Grandma was right. Sometimes the best way to rise above is to help others rise with you. The lights of Tokyo twinkled below, each one representing a story, a perspective, a potential for change. Tomorrow would bring more merger negotiations, but now they were negotiating for something far bigger than just business success. 1 week after the Tokyo merger was successfully signed, Sarah found herself back at the same airport where everything had started. However, this time was different. The small regional airport was buzzing with activity, transformed into a venue for TechVision Global's first expanded inclusion seminar. Thomas Wells stood nervously at the entrance, wearing his security uniform but with a new addition, a badge that read Change Ambassador. His teenage daughter, Maya, stood proudly beside him, helping to welcome the arriving participants. The seminar had been overbooked within hours of being announced, with security personnel, airport staff, and corporate employees from across the country eager to attend. Ms. Mitchell, Thomas called out as Sarah approached, I never imagined that my biggest mistake would turn into all of this. He gestured at the crowded airport terminal, where over 300 people were gathering. Sarah smiled warmly. Sometimes our worst moments can become our best teachers, Thomas. Are you ready to share your story? Before he could answer, a group of Japanese executives, led by Mr. Tanaka and his daughter Yuki, entered the terminal. They had flown in specifically for this event, seeing it as the perfect launch for their new joint global initiative. The terminal's main waiting area had been converted into a conference space. Chairs were arranged in a circle rather than rows. Sarah's specific request, as she believed real change happened when people could see each other as equals. As the session began, Sarah stepped into the center of the circle. A few weeks ago, right here in this airport, something happened that many would consider unfortunate. She gestured to Thomas, who stood up bravely. But today, we're here to talk about how unfortunate moments can become unprecedented opportunities. Thomas walked to the center, his voice shaking slightly as he began to speak. I've been a security guard for 15 years. I thought I was good at my job because I could spot who belonged and who didn't. But that morning, I learned that my idea of belonging was built on prejudices I didn't even know I had. The room was silent, every person leaning forward to listen. In the audience, Sarah noticed airport cleaning staff sitting next to corporate executives, security guards next to CEOs. The artificial barriers of status and position had disappeared in this circle of shared learning. Maya, Thomas's daughter, spoke next. When my dad told me what happened, I was so embarrassed. But then he told me how Ms. Mitchell responded, and I realized this is how real change happens, not through shame, but through understanding. Throughout the day, more stories emerged. A Japanese executive admitted to dismissing female employees' ideas. A corporate manager confessed to making assumptions about people's capabilities based on their accents. Each story was met not with judgment, but with nodding heads and murmurs of recognition. During the lunch break, Sarah received news that similar seminars were being planned at airports and corporations across Asia, Europe, and America. The video of her interaction with Thomas had sparked a global conversation about handling discrimination with dignity. "You've started something remarkable," Yuki said to Sarah as they watched the participants engaging in honest discussions. "In Japan, we'd often avoid confronting these issues directly. But your approach, using a mistake as a bridge to understanding, this resonates across all cultures." Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her PR team. Major airlines were now requesting the training program for their staff. What had started as a small airport incident was evolving into an international movement for change in the travel and corporate sectors. As the day drew to a close, Thomas stood up one last time. "A few weeks ago, I thought I'd lost my job. Instead, I found a new purpose. Today, when I check people's credentials, I check my assumptions first." The room erupted in applause. Sarah watched as people exchanged contact information, made plans for follow-up discussions, and formed connections across the very boundaries that had once divided them. As the sun set outside the airport windows, Sarah thought about how far they'd come from that morning when Thomas tried to stop her from boarding her plane. The same terminal that had witnessed an act of discrimination had now become a classroom for change. "Ready for the next session?" Jessica asked, showing Sarah the schedule for upcoming seminars across the country. Sarah looked around the room one last time, watching as Thomas and his daughter helped pack up materials. "You know what, Jessica? I think we're all just getting started." 1 week after the Tokyo merger was successfully signed, Sarah found herself back at the same airport where everything had started. However, this time was different. The small regional airport was buzzing with activity, transformed into a venue for TechVision Global's first expanded inclusion seminar. Thomas Wells stood nervously at the entrance, wearing his security uniform but with a new addition, a badge that read Change Ambassador. His teenage daughter, Maya, stood proudly beside him, helping to welcome the arriving participants. The seminar had been overbooked within hours of being announced, with security personnel, airport staff, and corporate employees from across the country eager to attend. "Miss Mitchell," Thomas called out as Sarah approached. "I never imagined that my biggest mistake would turn into all of this." He gestured at the crowded airport terminal where over 300 people were gathering. Sarah smiled warmly. "Sometimes our worst moments can become our best teachers, Thomas. Are you ready to share your story?" Before he could answer, a group of Japanese executives, led by Mr. Tanaka and his daughter Yuki, entered the terminal. They had flown in specifically for this event, seeing it as the perfect launch for their new joint global initiative. The terminal's main waiting area had been converted into a conference space. Chairs were arranged in a circle rather than rows. Sarah's specific request, as she believed real change happened when people could see each other as equals. As the session began, Sarah stepped into the center of the circle. "A few weeks ago, right here in this airport, something happened that many would consider unfortunate." She gestured to Thomas, who stood up bravely. "But today, we're here to talk about how unfortunate moments can become unprecedented opportunities." Thomas walked to the center, his voice shaking slightly as he began to speak. "I've been a security guard for 15 years. I thought I was good at my job because I could spot who belonged and who didn't. But that morning, I learned that my idea of belonging was built on prejudices I didn't even know I had." The room was silent, every person leaning forward to listen. In the audience, Sarah noticed airport cleaning staff sitting next to corporate executives, security guards next to CEOs. The artificial barriers of status and position had disappeared in this circle of shared learning. Maya, Thomas's daughter, spoke next. "When my dad told me what happened, I was so embarrassed. But then he told me how Ms. Mitchell responded, and I realized this is how real change happens, not through shame, but through understanding." Throughout the day, more stories emerged. A Japanese executive admitted to dismissing female employees' ideas. A corporate manager confessed to making assumptions about people's capabilities based on their accents. Each story was met not with judgment, but with nodding heads and murmurs of recognition. During the lunch break, Sarah received news that similar seminars were being planned at airports and corporations across Asia, Europe, and America. The video of her interaction with Thomas had sparked a global conversation about handling discrimination with dignity. "You've started something remarkable," Yuki said to Sarah as they watched the participants engaging in honest discussions. "In Japan, we often avoid confronting these issues directly. But your approach, using a mistake as a bridge to understanding, this resonates across all cultures." Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her PR team. Major airlines were now requesting the training program for their staff. What had started as a small airport incident was evolving into an international movement for change in the travel and corporate sectors. As the day drew to a close, Thomas stood up one last time. "A few weeks ago, I thought I'd lost my job. Instead, I found a new purpose. Today, when I check people's credentials, I check my assumptions first." The room erupted in applause. Sarah watched as people exchanged contact information, made plans for follow-up discussions, and formed connections across the very boundaries that had once divided them. As the sun set outside the airport windows, Sarah thought about how far they'd come from that morning when Thomas tried to stop her from boarding her plane. The same terminal that had witnessed an act of discrimination had now become a classroom for change. "Ready for the next session?" Jessica asked, showing Sarah the schedule for upcoming seminars across the country. Sarah looked around the room one last time, watching as Thomas and his daughter helped pack up materials. "You know what, Jessica? I think we're all just getting started."